Hello and welcome to this video on trading blocks. First thing to notice is that trade block doesn't have a K. It is just block as in le bloc, and that is just a way of life. So in this video, we're going to be looking at what a trading block is and the main types. Secondly, some of the major trade blocks and who they are. And then lastly, what is the impact of trade blocks on business? So let's start off with what is a trade block. Well, a trade block exists when governments make agreements between themselves to do with trade. Normally, this is to make trade more free, so to remove trade barriers and encourage trade between the member states. Often, these countries are close together geographically because it makes sense in that respect, because trade is easier to do with a neighboring partner. Sometimes a trading bloc can have agreements that aren't just on trade, they can also sometimes evolve into political arrangements as well. So there are lots of different types of trade bloc that come under the title of trade blocks, and we need to be aware of 5 different types. The first one is what's known as a preferential trade area, and that is where countries agree to eliminate trade barriers, for example, tariffs, on particular goods and services. So not all goods and services, but maybe on a couple of key items. So China might say to Japan, we will remove tariffs on your bikes, and Japan might say, well, we will in return remove tariffs on your clothes, and they have created a preferential trade area together. The next one up, if you like, is a free trade area, and that's when trade barriers are removed for all goods and services. So there are no tariffs, no quotas on any goods and services between countries. And when this is the case, we call that a free trade area. And that's probably the most common example. The next one up after this is a customs union, and that builds on a free trade area. Tariffs on all goods and services have been removed, but also now an external tariff has been applied for any non-members of that trade bloc. So there is no barriers between trade for members, but also they now have a common external tariff. They agree to have a tariff that applies just to non-members. Okay, 2 more after that. The next one up is what's known as a common market. And again, that involves the removal of all trade barriers, but also now we allow free movement of the factors of production. So we say workers can go across to any different member. Money can flow freely between different member countries, as well as trading goods and services. The final one would be an economic union, and that's taking a common market a bit further by then maybe having some common economic policies to do with maybe government spending or taxation. And sometimes this will involve things like having the same currency, so a monetary union. So we've got these 5 different types of trade bloc, ranging from quite a low level of integration, where just trade barriers are removed on particular goods and services, all the way up to quite a full-on integration, possibly even having the same currency and the same economic policies. So there are some comparisons here to be drawn between what trading blocks are trying to achieve and the WTO, the World Trade Organization. So both these organizations or both these things have a similarities in that the WTO also seeks to reduce trade barriers and promote world trade, and that can be similar to the objective of trading blocks in that trade blocks often encourage specialization between member states. Both organizations would argue that they are involved in trade creation. They can lead to more economies of scale, and they can make fairer competition occur. However, there can be some conflict between trade blocks, these organizations, and the WTO, because trade blocks might conflict with WTO because they distort trade to some extent by creating barriers, particularly when you go for a customs union or higher. By implementing a tariff for non-members, they're distorting trade. So this might have a negative impact on non-members and lead to a less efficient overall allocation of resources or production process. Often it can lead to retaliation as well between trading blocks, and so more protectionism. So there are lots of different types of trading blocks and different trading blocks in existence, and we need to have an awareness of some of them. We're going to look at three in a little bit of detail, but here are some examples of more common ones. European Union is a trade block we're going to come on to look at in a second. The slightly wider European Free Trade Area, the North American NAFTA agreement. There is one in South America called Mercosur. There's one in Southeast Asia. We've got them in Southern Africa, South Asia, Central America around the Pacific, and then lastly in the Caribbean. And these range from free trade areas to customs unions to common markets. So we've looked at what a trading bloc is and the main types. We're now going to look at some of the major trade blocks. So the first one and the most common one that's cited as an example, the one we need to know about is the European Union. And there are 28 member nations of the EU, collectively known as the EU 28, and here they are. The EU is a common market and also a customs union in that it has a common external tariff. So there is free movement of the factors of production between these countries, and also they apply a tariff for imports from non-member countries. As we know, in June 2016, the UK voted in a referendum to leave the European Union, and that is expected to occur between 2019 and 2020. So the European single market, sometimes known as the SEM, the single European market, is based on four key principles. And the first is that as part of this trading bloc, there is free trade in goods. So businesses can sell their products anywhere in the EU without any tariffs, without any quotas, and there can't be any penalties. The second one is mobility of labour. Citizens of EU member states can live, study and work in any other country. Free movement of capital, so money and currency can flow freely between member states and EU citizens. And then lastly, free trade in services. Professional services, pensions, advice, architecture, telecoms, advertising can be offered in any member state. So this creates a common market for countries in the European Union. So the EU as a market, what's the advantage of being part of this trading bloc? Well, the EU in total accounts for around 30% of the total value of global GDP. It's quite a variety of different country sizes, with Germany being the largest and Malta the smallest. And it accounts for 7% of the overall world's population, but it's a very large market, 503 million potential customers. And those customers are relatively wealthy because GDP is quite high. However, the EU does have problems with unemployment and in particular youth unemployment. It's worth noticing here that the euro area is not the same as the EU. The EU is the 28 countries we just looked at. The euro area are just those countries that use the euro. So that's a kind of subsection within the EU. The pros and cons of being part of the European single market. Well, an advantage of being part of the EU is that trade is encouraged within member states, and that can benefit members' economies. There may be stronger competition within the market, which can make firms more efficient and can also benefit consumers through more choice and lower prices. For businesses, there's a big access to a large base of customers, 28 countries and over 500 million potential customers. So a lot of opportunity to expand and benefit from economies of scale. And it can also be very good for workers in terms of they're able to go and work anywhere within the single market without restriction. On the flip side, it can be criticized that the single European market diverts trade away from non-members. In some markets, these large markets are dominated by monopoly companies. Some countries see unemployment as production is transferred to states with lower labour costs, and there is a cost of being part of the single European market, which is about £15 billion per year. So, as you're aware, the UK has recently decided to leave the European Union. What might be some of the impacts? Well, since their decision, we've seen a weaker exchange rate. Um, so, a weaker pound makes imports more expensive and exports cheaper. So, it's good potentially for exporting companies, although it depends whether those companies will face um, tariffs or any protectionist measures on their exports. However, bad news here in terms of prices of imports, which may have a knock-on effect for inflation. Again, the fall in business confidence and the uncertainty associated with the exit terms means that we might see weaker demand within the economy and also lower economic growth. The housing market may be disrupted through a fall in confidence, although it would be noted that the fall in the pound does make UK houses more attractive for overseas buyers. And then lastly, there may be an impact on unemployment as we maybe lose some export markets or the economy maybe loses some demand, then there might be an impact on unemployment, although that's unlikely to be felt for a while yet. So we looked at the EU. A couple of other ones we should be aware of. The first one is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And this is a bloc of 10 nations with an economic size of $2.3 trillion. It's currently a free trade area, although there are plans to establish an economic community. It has quite a diverse range of members in the trading bloc, so quite advanced economies like Singapore, all the way to developing countries like Myanmar. And these are the members. So we can see it's Southeast Asian nations here have a free trade arrangement between them over trade. And the final trading bloc that we're going to look at is the North American Free Trade Association called NAFTA. And the three member countries here are the USA, Canada, and Mexico. The aim here is to eliminate any barriers to trade between the three countries. So this is again as a free trade area. And what we've seen is that it's led to significant foreign direct investment into Mexico, particularly from the USA, to take advantage perhaps of lower labor costs and then export from Mexico back into the USA for the larger customer base. This has created some tension amongst American workers who feel perhaps they might have lost their jobs as production was transferred to Mexico, which has maybe had an impact on recent political elections in the States. However, a lot of economists would argue that during the course of existence, free trade between these countries has led to significant economic growth and a higher all-round standard of living for the three members. So we looked at the trading blocks, we looked at some of the major types. Now let's have a quick look at the impact on businesses. Well, some positive impacts of trading blocks might be free trade and access to markets for those businesses that are outward looking and looking to expand internationally. Being part of a trade bloc, maybe a common market, would give you access to workers, components can be moved and knowledge can be moved around freely, and you have a wider pool. A large trading bloc can lead to a large international scale of operations and economies of scale. And also the opportunity for businesses to maybe locate in those member countries where taxes or labour costs are cheaper, which can have a positive impact on financial performance. In terms of negative impacts, or being part of a trade bloc, perhaps a customs union, and having a common external tariff might limit trade with countries outside of the bloc. So in terms of customers, but also in terms of accessing supplies. Not all members may have the same power within a bloc. So in the EU, there are voting rights depending on how large an economy is. So if your business is part of a smaller economy, your government may not have as much influence over the terms of the bloc and what happens. Again, businesses may be subject to political uncertainty, and political decisions may influence the business through how the bloc develops. Trading blocs may damage domestic industries if they lack protection and a larger competitor from another country within the bloc enters the market as well. So in this video, we've looked at what is a trade block and the main types. We've looked at 3 major trade blocks and the impact of trade blocks on businesses. That's it. Thank you very much.